This world we live in greatly admires strength. Strength is a big thing. The strong, the mighty, they win the day. I mean, for instance, we love our sports, and sports have to do with strength. And we're always in awe of those that are strong. I mean, we're into the NHL playoffs right now. There's some pretty strong guys involved in that. I understand. I haven't watched a minute of it. And I'm glad I just checked the standings. I see that, we're down 3-0, I think. Or those that would cheer for the Habs, Montreal Canadiens, against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I guess the fourth game is tomorrow night. They could be eliminated, and Tampa Bay would win the Stanley Cup. In any case, all those guys are tremendous athletes. I mean, there's the stamina they have to just go full out for, many minutes of a hockey game, and practice with the skill they have. We're impressed. The Super Bowl is, I think, that's segueing to football here, but the Super Bowl is, I think, the most watched TV show or something like that, and it's just and it's all about power. It's about who's the strongest, who's the mightiest. And we also admire the beautiful. We admire the rich. We are impressed with the talented, and the best of the best rise to the top in our world. For instance, in Canada, and I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying this is the way the world is. Bianca Andreescu, our lady tennis champion from Southern Ontario. That's quite recently. Way over the years, Oscar Peterson has been a Canadian pianist. It's just top of his game. Amazingly talented guy. Rose to the worldwide acclaim. So I mean that's kind of thing I'm thinking about here. Now, when nations are strong, they often embark on empire building. So, this has gone on for since the history of the world that we know of. And when they're strong, they take over the weaker nations. So we think of back in the day, the Egyptians, and then we think of the Babylonians and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then finally the Romans. At the time of Jesus' birth, was a huge empire in the world. And they were cruel. But the British actually had a pretty big go at empire building, hence the name the British Empire. And they, at a time when new territories were being discovered, they really got in there, like North America and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and Africa. Man, they colonized much of India, in much of the world. Often this had disastrous consequences. So, for instance, the colonialism of North America, in that mindset that everybody we need to make them like us, was part of what was behind this whole residential school fiasco, and kind of trying to destroy the culture and the language of others, because they were stronger and they could do it and they were getting away with it. We were, if you will, or those in our ancestors. But all that kind of thinking, that idea of strength is what it's all about, is the opposite of the viewpoint of Jesus Christ. It really is. So as soon as you start to head into the New Testament, the Gospels, for instance, you get to the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus starts saying things like, blessed are the meek, or blessed are the meek. Blessed are the poor, right? Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted. These are not the strong. These are the weak. So Jesus is blessing and declaring a blessing for those who are weak, not for the strong. So the theme today is the weak and the strong. And the picture I put up, which you will see if you look this up online, is a picture of David and Goliath, who, may be a bit of a tease because I didn't read the story of David and Goliath, but boy, that is a classic story from Scripture. And even before we get to the story of David and Goliath, the story of David being chosen is a story of the weak and the strong. I mean, the prophet Samuel was called by God to go get one of Jesse's boys and anoint him to be king of Israel. He gets there and they trot out the oldest one. I forget their names. And one by one, and God keeps telling Samuel, no, not him, till they get well, David's not even there. He's back home somewhere watching the sheep. And Samuel says to Jesse, is that it? Is that all you got? And inside that passage, it actually says, humans look on the outward things, but God looks on the heart. So this young fella, probably a teenager, was, an unlikely, a comely youth, he's called, was God's pick. It's the weak, not the strong, not the oldest. And then not that long after that, it's, this championship duel with Goliath. And guess who wins? Not the strong, but the weak. David's the obvious underdog, and he is the weak warrior. And the reason he is able to do it is simply because he trusts God. I mean, it's simply miraculous. He takes a stone and slays the giant. So now you may think, well, that's a cute Bible story, but it's really, we're to take those stories into account when we consider the way God works in our world and in our lives. That God shows his strength in our weakness. So that brings us to Paul, which is the story of the day. And Paul was told, I'm losing my hair. I've got 3 screens going here. So Paul was, as you will recall, when he was strong in himself, and as to righteousness under the law, he said, blameless, Pharisee of Pharisees. He was out persecuting the church, dragging people off to prison who were Christians, and even stood at held the coats while they stoned one of the key leaders of the early church to death, Stephen. And he thought, I'm doing this for God. I mean, that was the time of his strength. So when God calls Paul, he says, you're going to have to. It kind of related to what he did to the church. He says, you will suffer many things and take the gospel to the Gentiles. And Paul does. Boy, he's imprisoned, he's stoned, he's whipped, he's persecuted, he's chased from town to town, he's chased out of towns, he has to run for his life, he's shipwrecked. he has quite a time. So that's kind of part of the background of the passage that we have before us today. And in this passage, though, in spite of the trials that Paul goes through, he talks about, he goes on to visions and revelations from the Lord. He says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Now, pretty much scholars unanimously believe that this was Paul himself, that he's talking about himself in the third person. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I don't know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise. So it's quite an experience he had. Whatever it was, he doesn't tell us, because he says he heard inexpressible things that people are not permitted to tell. I'll boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses, he says. So this is the background. Paul has had all kinds of revelations and experiences, supernatural experiences of the risen Christ, of God, of paradise, and he knows a lot. But then he says, to keep from becoming conceited, because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh. So if you ever hear somebody say, oh, it's such a thorn in the flesh, this is where it comes from. Once again, it's one of those sayings that's kind of made its way into the general vocabulary that comes straight out of the Bible. And it's from Paul, a thorn in my flesh. So in order for me not to get puffed up, because Paul is understanding now that that's a distinct possibility once you are given much by God. It can go to your head. And Paul was being very used by God, and he's being shown a lot of things by God. And so he says he was given a thorn in the flesh. Doesn't tell us what it is. Of course, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of speculation about what that might have been. Whether it was loss of eyesight, some think, or some other kind of crippling disease, whatever it was, we don't even know. But he says it wasn't fun. A messenger of Satan to torment me. So it was tormenting. And so it says 3 times he went to the Lord in prayer and seriously pleaded with him to take this away. 3 times. And the answer was no. So we ask God for things, and we should. And Paul was right to ask God for deliverance. And it's okay to do that. And Paul went ahead and did that. But sometimes the answer is no. And so then Jesus stopped. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Amazing. My power is made perfect in weakness. And then he goes on, as he absorbed that, and it became part of who he was, he says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. So he sees there's a direct correlation between how weak he is and how much Christ's power will rest on him. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight. Not there yet. But Paul was, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So, we lament quite a bit our weaknesses, and it's tough. Weaknesses happen. I mean, there are weaknesses that come to us just from age. There are weaknesses that come from sickness. There are weaknesses that come from disability. And what this is telling us is that all of that God uses. When we're strong in and of ourselves, we tend to get proud about it. We tend to get puffed up. So when we understand that we are weak, that's when the power of God begins to more completely, more fully, more effectively move through us. So, amazing teaching here from the scriptures. So let's apply this to the mission of the church. Now, our mission, and all 3 of our congregations, is to know Christ and to make him known, which is a serious assignment. However, we also now, what is making it perhaps even more challenging, I'm not sure, or a bigger adventure, is that we live in what's now called the post-Christendom world. Post-Christendom world. I mean, for centuries, we were in Christendom, since Constantine back in the 4th century was the emperor of Rome, and basically made it the state religion. And after that, it was very organized and powerful, and huge cathedrals were made. The church gained a lot of power in the world and put together lots of institutions, and right up till basically the middle of the 20th century, when it started to go into decline. Now, the thing about Christendom was that to a great extent, it was about displaying strength. It was about showing how big and powerful and important the church was. So, and on the one hand, in the midst of that, many good things happened. I mean, look at the architecture that came out of that, and the education systems that came out of that, and the freedom of expression that came out of that, the art that came out of that, the paintings and the sculptures. Amazing things came out of this era of Christendom. But on the other hand, much of the essence of the gospel was lost because the church was in power, if you will. People felt intimidated and judged. People felt powerless and undervalued if you weren't on the inside. The church was unapproachable and even scary for a lot of people. And that is not what Jesus intended. So the answer in this new age, new time of mission, our mission has not changed. We are still called to know Christ and to make him known. God has given to us the ministry of reconciliation. And the answer for us, is to get back to this, is to accept, even boast, as Paul says, I boast, to boast in our weaknesses, to realize that we're weak. We're no better than anybody. I think that used to be the impression. Oh, these are better than others. We are needy. We are sinful. We have failed. We are weak. We aren't telling people about the cross of Christ because they need grace and forgiveness and help. We are telling them because we do, and we have found it. If we would reach our world, and by golly, that's in my heart to do, and I hope and believe it's in the hearts of many of us to do that, to tell our kids and our families and our neighbors about what we've experienced through the grace of Jesus Christ, that they might know him too. They might, and when you know this, you're reconciled to God, then you really discover who you are. It answers the deep, deep questions of life. We want people to have that. If that's going to happen, we need to be a people of great humility, of genuine kindness, and generosity, and compassion, and persistent prayer, because we are in desperate need of God's great power and intervention in our own lives, and in that of our neighbors and our families and in our world.